Rain battered the empty company lot, setting the stage for an act of pure compassion. That was when Caleb Turner halted, noticing what everyone else had selfishly chosen to ignore. A pregnant woman lay slumped against a cold concrete pillar, gripping her stomach, fighting for every shallow, terrified breath. People just kept walking, nobody looked back. He faced a choice between clocking in and acting selflessly. He chose kindness. He carried her to his car and sped into the raging storm. Helping a stranger meant he had no clue who this suffering woman was. He never expected that she secretly owned his entire company. You and I have to wonder, what happens when giving without expectation risks everything, only to spark a beautiful miracle neither person could predict? Caleb Turner's phone alarm buzzed at 5:40 in the morning, ringing the way it always did, sharp and thin. A relentless sound designed to pierce whatever fragile scrap of rest he had selflessly collected. He killed the alarm fast to protect Grace's peaceful rest. He slipped off the mattress quietly, tiptoeing in his socks through the cramped hallway straight into their tiny kitchen space. Their home was tight, just 2 bedrooms. Though calling that tiny second space a bedroom was being generous. The kitchen bled right into the living area, leaving barely enough square footage to breathe. He navigated the dark rooms entirely by touch, the quiet routine of a devoted father expecting nothing in return. He filled the kettle, keeping the harsh overhead lights completely off. He placed a little bowl for Grace's cereal right there. Then he just leaned his tired back against the cold sink, staring blankly at the dull gray dawn creeping above the outside alley. 29 years old, but his selfless grind made him feel 40. Not shattered, just wearing that quiet exhaustion you get when you endlessly sacrifice your own needs to carry someone else. Grace's mother walked out right before the girl turned 2. Caleb accepted that painful reality instantly, stepping up to provide with 0 complaints, just as he handled every hardship. He quickly relocated them to this cheaper place. He gave up his days to scrub floors overnight at Vance Industries. That was the biggest corporate real estate firm in town. All for an extra $60 an hour, purely so his little girl would finally have solid health insurance coverage. He surrendered his existence to her routine, 7 o'clock drop-offs and 3 o'clock pickups, every single day without fail. For 3 long years. His loving sacrifice survived brutal daily pressures that would easily crush a much weaker kind of commitment. Grace stumbled out at 6:15, her morning hair wildly tangled, pulling her beloved blanket along with that pure, innocent confidence of a child who knows she is deeply loved. She was 6 years old and already had her dad's deep eyes, plus her grandma's quiet way of observing the world without needing to speak up immediately. "You made the cereal already," she mumbled. "I made the cereal," he replied. She hopped up, judging her breakfast with the heavy focus only a little kid can muster. "Did you eat?" "I'll eat at work." She gave him that special glare meant for obvious dad lies. He just sat there nursing black coffee, perfectly content watching her eat. You and I know the profound beauty of those quiet mornings as the light gently shifts. The air smelling sweet with cold cereal and Grace's shampoo, and the faint, sweet chemical scent of industrial cleaner still clung to his heavy jacket from last night. Giving without expecting reward made his exhaustion manageable. The unpaid gas bill sitting there, the dripping bathroom sink he simply never had a moment to fix. The harsh reality that his worn boots had started leaking freezing rain, so he quietly rotated them by the hot radiator every single night before his next grinding shift. But little Grace was worth every selfless sacrifice. He never once had to force himself to believe that. Loving her meant asking for absolutely nothing. Dropping her at his mother's by 7 a.m., he drove toward Vance Industries in the early darkness. The waking city still half asleep and moving slowly. The massive glass structure stood 42 floors high, its grand lobby always polished to a perfect shine. True kindness is unseen labor. The maintenance crew worked those invisible, lonely overnight hours servicing an entirely empty building, fixing the heating systems and complex elevator mechanics, securing the plumbing, quietly preventing disaster so the privileged day staff never had to hear a single complaint. Caleb mastered this hidden work, far better than just good. He possessed a deep mechanical intuition that his bosses considered helpful and his weary colleagues called uncanny. He could hear a failing ventilation unit, long before the fancy diagnostic software ever caught it. Tracing a blind electrical fault across 3 whole floors without needing blueprints. Stepping into a noisy mechanical room and knowing instantly what worked perfectly and what was silently begging for repair. His busy supervisor certainly knew this. The building engineers even praised it across 2 performance reviews. Yet in the strict hierarchy of Vance Industries, a humble maintenance worker was exactly that, and the quiet folks who kept the building breathing in the dark never asked for praise. You and I know true kindness only gets noticed when things break. The massive corporation took its wealthy owner's name, Eleanor Vance, though Caleb had never crossed her path. Frankly, most of the Silent Night crew had never seen her. She was purely reputation, a 32-year-old CEO who inherited the giant firm at 26 when her dad passed, spending the next 6 years transforming a modest real estate management firm into an absolute corporate powerhouse. The wealthy executives working high above Caleb's head always used one specific word to describe her: controlled. Also demanding, intensely private, she sat way up on floor 41. Getting anywhere near her meant going through a woman named Sophia Blake, who had practically turned blocking access into a ruthless art form. To Caleb, Eleanor Vance was just brass letters on a lobby directory, plus a framed portrait hanging near those hidden service elevators. A sharp-featured executive in a tailored gray blazer staring from the glass with the cold expression of someone completely at peace with being brutally decisive. He only glanced at that silent portrait occasionally while working his thankless overnight shifts. He never judged it, really. She was just part of the expensive scenery, just like those dusty air ducts were part of the architecture. Look, we've all felt how life quietly grinds you down, silently testing your resolve without offering a single reward. October delivered a sudden, heavy rate hike on his tiny apartment's heating bill, and he silently gave more, worrying that little Grace's old winter coat was running too short at the sleeves. The single dad saved every penny, the kind of scraping by where every grocery trip meant recalculating. His margins were paper-thin. Any little bump meant facing some really tough choices. He kept calling it a phase. He had to lie to himself just to keep going, because the alternative, well, despair wasn't a luxury a single father could afford for long. Let's set the scene. He clocked into his night shift one mid-October Thursday. Checked in with the night maintenance boss. Tested a third-floor heating unit that kept throwing off random error codes. Then he spent 2 hours flat on his back beneath a garage service panel, swapping out a rusted wire that messed up the airflow sensors on level 2. The manual labor was perfectly fine. Fixing things demanded zero emotional energy. It only asked for quiet focus and steady hands. And he could give that without draining his already empty tank. He was typing up the repair logs when the storm finally broke. The rain hit fast and hard. That brutal autumn downpour that just explodes out of nowhere without any warning. A heavy deluge pounding the top garage deck, spilling down the open ramps in thick, freezing gray sheets. By 8:15 p.m., the second level was practically a ghost town. The last few late workers hurried out, collars pulled tight against the bitter chill. Caleb gathered his gear and headed straight for the service lift. 40 minutes left on his shift. He heard it before he saw it. A tight, muffled groan that definitely wasn't the wind or the pipes. A strained human gasp heavy with pure struggle. It echoed from the VIP parking corner on level 2. He froze in his tracks. There it was again. He spun around and rushed over. A woman lay collapsed by a black sedan, her back shoved against the rear tire. One hand gripping her swollen belly, the other slipping on the soaked, icy concrete. Clearly pregnant, and looking painfully close to her due date. You could see the misery. Her heavy winter coat was completely drenched in freezing rain. Wet hair plastered to her cheeks. He could hear her panting 10 feet out. Floodwater from the top deck washed down the ramp, pooling around her in a freezing puddle. Now watch this closely. 2 other people were right there. They definitely heard her cries. One guy just bolted for the elevator, completely refusing to look. The other stared, then suddenly got very interested in his cell phone. True apathy. But Caleb didn't hesitate. He closed the gap instantly and knelt down. "Hey, can you hear me?" Her dark, terrified eyes fluttered open. Underneath the blinding pain, you could see her desperately fighting that deep, stubborn pride. That awful embarrassment of needing a stranger's help. "I'm fine," she whispered, an absolutely crazy thing to claim right then. "How far apart are the contractions?" She just blinked. "Maybe 2. Then a brutal wave hit, and she practically dug her fingers into her swollen belly. "I ordered a ride how long ago?" True help never waits. Before she could answer, another contraction struck. She closed her eyes against the pain. "You and I know true kindness acts fast," and Caleb decided in a breath. 40 minutes remained on his night shift. The security radio rested right there on his belt. He could just call it in. Building policy was crystal clear. Stepping out of his role to handle liabilities was explicitly banned. Forbidden. Leaving the night shift without clear supervisor authorization was. Written down as a firing offense in Section 7 of the staff rulebook. He knew that rule perfectly. This single father read the whole manual his first week just because that is exactly who he was. But genuine compassion expects nothing. He made the risky choice anyway, completely calm. "I am taking you to the hospital," he told her. "Grab hold of my neck." She tried to speak, but he was already lifting. He carried her to his 10-year-old sedan. It had a busted bumper and a heater that barely worked 70% of the time. Gently, he settled her inside. By the time he cranked the old engine awake, she grew totally silent, a terrifying stillness that worried him way more than her cries. He rushed out of the parking lot into the pouring rain. Both hands gripped the wheel while he kept a careful eye on her. He navigated the wet streets with deep, focused calm. He knew exactly how to stop urgent situations from turning into panic. "Stay with me," he said, just practical, offering help without needing a single thing back. She managed a very faint sound that he firmly took as a yes. The emergency hospital room was 11 minutes from work. Caleb easily covered that distance in 8. That meant blowing through one red light at a totally empty intersection at 9:15 Thursday night. A choice he made instantly, expecting zero praise for it. Let's picture this sacrifice together. Before his sedan even fully stopped in the emergency bay, Caleb was sprinting to her door. He carried her straight through the ER doors. Those sliding glass doors were barely open when he shouted for help. The hospital staff rushed over instantly. They had that special speed of medical workers who can read pure danger from afar. 2 trauma nurses and a young resident appeared right away, carefully taking the young mother from his tired arms. A metal gurney appeared from the left, and then she was quickly rolling away. Through those heavy doors, leaving him completely alone under the harsh fluorescent lights. Rainwater slowly dripped off his work jacket onto the cold linoleum. He just stood there, the nervous adrenaline washed out of his body in slow, cooling waves. He considered calling his angry supervisor, but realized it would not change a single thing. Doing it tonight instead of tomorrow morning. He remembered her dark eyes fighting through the pain. He asked for no reward, just simply hoping from the bottom of his heart she would be all right. Then he headed back to the office to clock out and face the music. His strict supervisor was waiting near the back door with a cold look. Caleb instantly knew his honest explanation meant absolutely nothing. We all know unfairness. The disciplinary meeting next morning was brief, like all terrible things. Brandon Cole had controlled those company facilities for 11 long years. He was robotic and procedurally exact, and he always had a way of reading corporate policy aloud with dead calm. He viewed human suffering as a math variable, never feeling the heavy moral weight of helping others. He was not secretly an evil man. He was just someone who lived inside the company rules so deeply and naturally that he forgot what selfless giving was. He couldn't see anything from the outside anymore. Let's look at this together. Brandon sat across from Caleb with the company handbook open, though he never even needed to glance at it. He already knew the exact violation numbers by heart. "You abandoned your post without permission," Brandon told him. "You drove a stranger in your personal car during shift hours, creating massive liability risks. You also failed to tell your boss before leaving the property. Each of these is a Category 2 rule violation, and 3 of these violations at once means you are fired immediately." Caleb just sat there, hands resting on the desk, remaining totally silent. "I get that there were special circumstances," Brandon went on. He used that hollow tone of someone offering a courtesy they don't actually mean. "But rules exist so personal choices don't put the whole company at risk. If every worker decided to stop, she was on the concrete, Caleb interrupted. I get that. She was in labor, completely alone in a dark parking garage in the pouring rain. I understand that, Mr. Turner, but that company policy is just a piece of paper, Caleb replied. He spoke quietly, showing no anger at all. True kindness leaves no regrets. He sounded like a man totally at peace. Brandon stared at him for a quiet second, then looked back at his desk. I will need your signature on this termination document. Liam Carter sat at his desk as Caleb crossed the maintenance floor to pack up. They had worked that same night shift together for nearly 2 years. Liam was a genuinely nice guy who always brought fresh donuts on Fridays. He remembered birthdays and helped lift heavy gear without being asked. He glanced up as Caleb entered, but quickly looked away, staring hard at his monitor. And the sheer speed of that avoidance proved how fast the morning news had already spread across the shop floor. Caleb emptied his metal locker without any fuss. Some worn gloves, and the small picture of Grace he had taped inside the door. Her autumn school portrait, rocking messy braids, smiling brightly at something just out of frame. He drove back home through the late morning sunlight. The pale autumn light washed over a city running exactly as it always did. Totally indifferent, busy, packed with strangers blindly chasing their own daily routines. Have you ever felt that? That deep, peaceful quiet inside when you do the right thing, ask for nothing back, and simply accept the hard consequences. He just thought about Grace and the exact financial math of what this next month would demand from him. To survive, letting the tough thoughts flow without any panic at all. Like watching a rushing river run, without ever trying to stop the water. The firing document sat folded in his jacket pocket like a heavy stone that somehow lacked any real weight yet, simply because he refused to fully process the pain. It was a survival skill he had mastered, not going totally numb but organizing his emotions. Only feel the pain when you can actually afford the breakdown. Right now, he absolutely could not afford it. His daughter was at school. The quiet apartment belonged entirely to him. He sat at that wooden kitchen table for hours, the folded termination letter still hiding in his jacket. You and I know true virtue is silent. He simply started calculating his next practical moves. He faced it like a mechanical problem. Calculating what he had, his debts, his slim margin, and his very next move. He shed 0 tears. Instead, he pictured the helpless pregnant woman in the rain. Her ragged breathing, her heavy weight leaning on him, and he just genuinely hoped, with pure, absolute sincerity, that the mother and her unborn baby were safe. He never once wondered if he should have ignored her. He already knew his truth. True compassion never needs a second thought. Picking his daughter Grace up at 3:15, they sat quietly on a bench outside, while she carefully looked up at his tired face, studying it like a difficult book she was trying to read. Bo met Kong? She asked in the Vietnamese her grandmother taught her, using it precisely, knowing it held much deeper emotional weight than simple English. Just a little, he replied. She placed her small, warm hand over his. You and I know this quiet love, sitting among fallen leaves in the thin October sun, completely silent. Meanwhile, Eleanor Vance woke up inside a private room at St. Catherine's Medical Center, greeted by steady heart monitors and that sterile, unique clinical light only hospitals seem to have. Flat, completely shadowless yet oddly gentle. For a brief second, she believed she was somewhere else entirely. Then reality quickly pieced itself together. The dripping IV line, the glowing pulse monitor attached, and her assistant Sophia Blake sitting rigidly by the window, balancing a digital tablet on her lap and wearing a mask of strict professional calm, barely hiding genuine personal relief right beneath the surface. My baby, Eleanor whispered, healthy. A healthy girl, she is safely in intensive care now. Born a little early, but the attending doctor called the delivery totally uncomplicated. She is truly beautiful, Sophia kept her voice incredibly steady. Eleanor stayed completely still, letting the miracle sink in. She had a daughter. You and I know how this feels, huge reality hitting in slow stages. How did I arrive here? Sophia quickly checked her screen. Security cameras show a night shift maintenance worker discovered you collapsed in the level 2 parking garage. He personally drove you to St. Catherine's in his own car. Eleanor fell completely silent. Broken memories of the parking garage flashed back. Freezing concrete seeping through her coat, pouring rain, and that terrifying instant her pregnant body completely stopped obeying her desperate mental commands. And then strong hands, gentle and calm, and a stranger's voice offering the most beautifully selfless, necessary comfort. Who was this man? His name is Caleb Turner. 3 years working overnight maintenance in our facilities division. Sophia hesitated, bracing herself like someone about to drop a heavy, uncomfortable piece of truth. He was fired yesterday morning. Eleanor slowly turned her head to stare right at Sophia. Fired for leaving his shift without permission. Human Resources processed his termination immediately that very morning. The sterile room went dead quiet. Outside, the indifferent city rushed on under a pale autumn sky. True sacrifice often hurts. Eleanor simply stared at the ceiling. The fierce emotion flooding her face was no longer the icy mask she wore in corporate boardrooms. Her realization wasn't obvious at first. It shifted quietly inside her, much like passing weather. But let's look closer. The pure selflessness of his action was suddenly crystal clear. Pull the full security footage, she firmly demanded. Both cameras on level 2, all of it. Already done, Sophia confirmed. Eleanor watched his selfless rescue from her hospital bed that very same afternoon. Her newborn baby sleeping safely in a bassinet beside her. She played that pure 4-minute act of kindness back twice. From the second she collapsed against the car, to the exact moment Caleb Turner's sedan vanished down the ramp into the stormy night. She noticed 2 co-workers who clearly saw her struggling, yet coldly kept right on walking. Then she saw how fast Caleb sprinted across that dark asphalt. The gentle way he knelt beside her. He lifted her safely, no hesitation and expecting absolutely nothing in return. She made Sophia pull his complete employee file. 3 years working there, absolutely 0 disciplinary issues. 2 commendations from engineers praising his extra effort that had literally stopped major equipment failures. Looking at his Human Resources paperwork, right under the emergency contacts, he simply wrote down Grace Turner. Age 6, single father and guardian. Eleanor held his file while her baby slept, finally seeing the brutal price of pure kindness. Not just an idea, but in the cold, corporate numbers she applied to absolutely everything. This man had a little girl. Based on his modest night shift pay, he clearly had 0 financial safety net whatsoever. He lost his sole income and his benefits. Think about it together. He ruined his record doing a selfless deed that saved 2 lives. She had managed this corporation for 6 years, making thousands of ruthless, coldly calculated choices. Mergers, harsh layoffs, firings, and reorganizations. She made every call using cold corporate data, completely ignoring the value of human decency. That was the ruthless personal standard she followed completely without exception. She honestly thought that was exactly what true professional strength looked like. It was just easier to pretend that being a tough boss and a decent human didn't conflict. She stared at her sleeping newborn's face for a very long time. Find out exactly where he is, she firmly told Sophia. And get me Brandon Cole's personnel file as well. In the tough weeks following Eleanor's hospital release. Meanwhile, Caleb survived each passing day with the quiet, intense focus of a single father solving a crisis. He sent out 14 job applications over 3 grueling weeks. 4 completely ignored his efforts. 7 fired back robotic rejections within 48 hours. His resume never even reached a real human. 2 actually brought him in for promising interviews, only to ghost him completely right after. Just 1 company offered him a role paying 11% below his old rate, offering absolutely 0 health benefits for a punishing 90-day probation period. We've all been there. He hadn't said yes, but sheer desperation pushed him dangerously close. His depleted savings account required absolutely no calculator. He canceled their streaming service and stopped buying weekly coffees down the street from Grace's elementary school. And he was buying food much differently now. Smaller portions, paying strict attention to exact prices. You and I know this kind of struggle. Opening his phone's calculator in the produce aisle had become pure instinct. He kept the gritty details from his mother when she called. She had already handed over $200 he never asked for, and he refused to take another single cent. His little girl Grace caught a nasty cold mid-November. Nothing life-threatening, but the heavy kind that sank into her chest, giving her a rough cough he could hear through their bedroom wall every single night. He would lie awake, calculating the brutal cost of an uninsured doctor visit. The numbers never added up to anything good. So he bought kids' medicine at the pharmacy, checking her fever constantly. He promised himself if she wasn't better by Thursday, he'd just swallow the debt and pay the clinic. Luckily, her fever broke Wednesday. He sat alone in the dim kitchen afterwards. She was fast asleep. He felt a quiet, unseen relief. The following Tuesday night, sitting at that exact same table, an unknown local number flashed as a missed call on his screen. He played the recorded voicemail. A woman spoke, calm, professional, unrushed. She called herself Sophia Blake, reaching out for Eleanor Vance. She politely asked for a chance to talk to him whenever he had a spare moment. The audio lasted exactly 30 seconds. She gave zero extra details. He was right there at the kitchen table that Tuesday when his phone displayed a missed call from a strange city number. He tapped to hear it. A calm, extremely professional woman's voice. Claiming to be Sophia Blake, calling on behalf of Eleanor Vance, she requested a brief conversation with him as soon as he could manage it. It cut off exactly at 30 seconds. Leaving absolutely no extra clues, Caleb played it back twice. He gently placed his phone on the wood, just staring at it. Someone lacking true kindness might panic here. They might dread the title CEO, terrified it just meant more awful legal exposure. A massive liability piled onto an already hard life, but Caleb felt zero dread. He simply sat with the recording in the dead quiet. Instead, he felt the calm readiness of a man who just helped a stranger and accepts whatever happens next. He had no grand master plan. He only had his actions that night and his pure, honest reasons for them. Here is where we see true kindness. He could stand firmly on that truth. Hearing little Grace coughed softly next door, he grabbed his phone and dialed the number. The instructions the following morning were incredibly simple. A car would grab him at 10. He was scheduled to reach the Vance Industries headquarters by 10:30. Nothing more. Putting on the only decent interview shirt that still fit him, he headed out to meet his ride, wanting absolutely nothing in return. During the drive, he convinced himself he was ready for whatever they threw at him, even though he had absolutely no clue what to expect from such a bizarre meeting. The massive corporate lobby looked exactly like it always did, with those giant windows. He stared at the polished floors his own night crew had cleaned for 3 years. He noticed the framed portrait hanging right by the main elevators. Think about this with me. He stopped there, staring up at that familiar photo just a few seconds longer than he normally would. The woman in the gray blazer. He'd helped her simply because true kindness expects nothing. He finally looked closely. He saw her differently now. Her tense jaw revealed everything. Not strict control, just pure, quiet loneliness. Carefully hidden, Sophia Blake greeted him by the elevators. Sharp and professional. Polite, exactly like someone whose whole job is smoothing over tough situations. She gave zero details about his firing, and Caleb simply didn't ask. They stopped on floor 40, not 41. The massive conference room stretched across the east wing, fully wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass. 20 people could sit there. A dozen folks were already waiting inside when the heavy door finally swung open. HR, some facility workers, and his old boss Brandon Cole at the far edge. When Brandon looked up, his face was perfectly blank, clearly trying way too hard to hide his nerves. The CEO, Eleanor Vance, stood quietly by the windows, arms resting freely. She surprised him. You and I expect corporate leaders to look stiff, but she just looked incredibly human. She stayed completely calm, but it did not feel fake. It was the quiet stillness of someone who spent serious time figuring out exactly what to say, needing zero extra preparation for the coming moment. She met his eyes the second he entered, completely raw and hiding zero agenda. "Mr. Turner," she said, "I really appreciate you coming." He took the middle seat Sophia pointed to, staring right at the massive windows. The room sat dead quiet, not one piece of paper. No business slides glowing on the screen. Eleanor stepped over to the head of the long table, pausing briefly before starting to speak. Her voice sounded just like it did in big quarterly reviews, steady, perfectly clear, and missing all the drama. "Let's watch this together." She detailed the whole rainy October 12th incident from the security tape. She shared what doctors confirmed and the blurry memories she actually kept. She named Caleb directly. She publicly named 2 other workers who saw her bleeding and just kept walking. She played the grainy parking lot footage, letting the silent room absorb every single frame. A single father rushing across slick pavement toward a pregnant stranger in deep pain, choosing to offer kindness instantly, long before he even reached her. A heavy, frozen silence hung over the dark room when the video ended. Eleanor turned her sharp gaze to Brandon Cole, expression totally frozen. "You fired this man," she told him, "for choosing the only decent human option available out there." Brandon opened his mouth to defend himself. "Don't," she ordered, totally cold. She faced Caleb next, her icy corporate exterior cracked just a tiny bit. A tiny quiet change that held a massive amount of genuine respect. "I have a simple question for you," she asked. "Above all else, why did you do it?" The room went dead silent. Caleb just sat with his hands folded, holding her gaze with steady, honest eyes. "Because you really needed help," he replied. Pausing slightly, "That is the whole answer." The entire space seemed to shift around that raw, selfless truth. You know the feeling. It happens whenever real, unselfish kindness suddenly fills an empty corporate space. Eleanor offered a slow, heavy nod, grasping what pure altruism actually looks like. "It is," she said. She turned right back to Brandon Cole. "You are terminated today. HR will handle your separation details." She delivered the news with that exact same steady, icy precision. Brandon just stared blankly at the dark table surface. He didn't argue. He knew he had absolutely nothing. Then Eleanor took a seat directly across from Caleb, not at the head of the table but right at his level, eye to eye. A deeply deliberate move. "I owe you an apology," she said, "one I cannot adequately make. What was done to you under this company name is not something I can undo. But I fully intend to get as close as my resources allow." She held his quiet gaze. "I reviewed your employee file and spoke with the building engineers about your work history. A facilities operations manager role has actually been sitting completely open since August. I want you to apply through the normal hiring process, just like any other candidate. I am just telling you it exists. The rest is entirely up to you." Caleb simply studied her. "I don't want this job just because I drove you to a hospital." "I know," she replied, "and I am not offering it for that. I am letting you know about it because your qualifications fit. And frankly, we have failed at internal career advancement for people in your specific division. Those are very different things." He weighed her words with the same methodical care he brought to every task. It was a fair distinction. "When exactly does the application window close?" "Friday," Sophia chimed in from the corner. "I will apply Thursday," Caleb replied. A faint shift crossed Eleanor Vance's expression, something hidden, not quite a full smile. "You and I both know true respect when we see it, and everyone in that room recognized it instantly." "Good," she said. His management interview happened the following Wednesday. Caleb answered every question directly and technically. He never mentioned that parking lot rescue once. He broke down system failures he had spotted over 3 years of grinding through their highly inadequate current setup. He broke down, too, serious equipment failure scenarios he diagnosed and completely resolved before they worsened. He pitched a cross-training workflow for the night shift that he had been secretly drafting in his notebook for nearly a year. The job offer called 3 days later, featuring a salary a full third higher than his previous hourly wage. Full healthcare benefits starting day 1, plus a team of 6 direct reports. And a clear mandate to rebuild the facility's operations documentation completely from scratch. He called his mom that evening, telling her the job search was over and she no longer needed to worry. She quietly held back tears, leaving so much unspoken on her end of the line. He took Grace out to the park on Saturday. The very first weekend in a month without a pending application, an interview, or that heavy, grinding financial panic hanging over him. They strolled together through the crisp autumn leaves. And she rambled on excitedly about some wild playground drama involving a giant spider and her classmate's brightly colored lunchbox. He listened intently to every single word, asking her all the perfect questions. And you know what? That ordinary afternoon was absolutely beautiful. Eleanor Vance showed up at the apartment on a late November Sunday. She'd called ahead through Sophia, and Caleb let Grace know they were expecting company. Grace took that news with intense focus, not asking a single question. His place was spotless, it always was. Rich smells drifted from the kitchen, somewhere between taking that afternoon phone call and her arrival. Caleb quietly decided this specific occasion called for a real home-cooked meal. Eleanor walked in holding a little bag from a children's bookstore. Picture this, she stood right in that kitchen doorway just looking. For the very first time since Caleb had ever laid eyes on her, she looked slightly less confident than the moment actually seemed to demand. She glanced around his home, not judging, just soaking it all in. And something in her face showed a deep, careful warmth that didn't feel clinical at all. Grace stepped from the hall, sized Eleanor up from across the room, then marched straight over and looked up. "You're the lady my dad helped," Grace said simply. Eleanor knelt down to the floor, bringing herself right to the girl's eye level. "I am. Are you okay now?" "Yes," Eleanor replied. "I have a baby girl. She's sleeping at home right now, but she's doing so well." Grace considered that with her usual heavy seriousness. Then she reached out and grabbed Eleanor's hand. No hesitation, no show. Just that simple, firm way kids have when they finally decide something. As if planting her hand right there completely settled whatever had been hovering in the air. "Good," Grace said. Caleb leaned in the kitchen doorway, totally silent. Something powerful hung in that exact moment, his little girl holding the hand of the woman he'd rescued in the rain. The soft afternoon light spilling inside, the scent of a warm meal on the stove. It was a pure memory Caleb knew he would carry forever. By January, sweeping policy changes finally hit Vance Industries. They announced it at the very first staff meeting of the year. Eleanor delivered the news herself, standing up front in a charcoal blazer in the main conference room. No notes, no long boring speeches. They were launching a brand new, formal emergency assistance protocol. It completely erased strict attendance rules when someone was in real physical danger. From now on, there would be mandatory quarterly reviews, checking internal promotion candidates from the maintenance and daily operations crews. They ordered a massive audit of every single corporate loophole that had allowed a. "You and I know nobody should lose their livelihood for showing basic human kindness." That document ran 22 pages long. Sophia wanted to call it the Turner Protocol. Eleanor fought the title for 3 days, but eventually agreed it fit perfectly. Caleb sat quietly in the third row, making sure he blended into the crowd. He hadn't asked for a single piece of this recognition. Think about it. True kindness expects nothing. He just wanted to work hard and hug his daughter. That was his truth before all this started, and it remained his truth today. The only real difference now was that his grueling work wasn't entirely invisible anymore. Not because he chased the spotlight, but because the company finally realized the heavy cost of turning a blind eye. The quiet hours stayed the same, the maintenance base, those long, lonely overnight shifts. You and I know those quiet workers, moving through the empty building, long before the morning shift clocks in. Their heavy labor carried on just like it always had before. Yet something deeper in the air had finally changed. These night shift workers weren't expected to silently accept being ignored anymore. His worn boots finally kept the rain out. Little Grace had a warm coat that actually fit her, with space left to grow. The heating bill was fully paid, and the next one too. Meanwhile, high up on the 41st floor, the executive who always used her success to hide how much she needed help was finally softening. It happened slowly, with the fierce honesty of someone who never does things halfway. Discovering the simple reality of how much lighter the load feels when shared. She wasn't someone who naturally embraced warmth or kindness easily, but she was deep at her core. A woman who, once she saw the right path forward, simply refused to quit. The loud, indifferent city kept rushing by around all of them, packed with strangers living out their own stories and facing crossroads. Each person constantly weighing the hidden costs, deciding to give or withhold. Let's be honest. We face 10,000 daily choices that don't seem like massive decisions until we look backward. But this single father stood in a wet parking lot and made a sacrifice that cost him something truly real. He didn't do it for a reward, a pat on the back, or to get ahead later. He gave everything simply because a pregnant woman was hurting, and he was right there to help. That pure, selfless instinct was the only reason required. Expecting nothing back was the whole answer then. It still is today. Real kindness is a simple truth that never needs changing. You and I just have to be brave enough to step up when a stranger hurts in the dark, risking everything on the line, right before the chance vanishes, leaving you with only the heavy question of what you would have done.